Scotland's World Cup campaign is officially over, and so too is Steve Clarke's 7-year reign as head coach. In today's final episode of the Scotsman World Cup podcast, we'll be looking back at the weekend that was and giving all our reaction to Steve Clarke's resignation. Hello and welcome to the final edition of the Scotsman World Cup podcast for this summer, as we address the big headline news from the Scotland camp that Steve Clarke has resigned from his role as Scotland manager over the weekend. To discuss everything to do with Steve Clarke's resignation and all the fallout, I'm first and foremost delighted to be joined by Scotsman Head of Sport Mark Atkinson. Mark, it was a 1 a.m. announcement, I think, so how are you doing? You all right?
By announcing it at the dead of night, well, not quite dead of night, it was just after midnight, I think, our time after Scotland's World Cup exit was confirmed. So yeah, it's been challenging, but it always is, and we like stories, so we can't complain too much.
There is that, yes, there is that. I'm also delighted to be joined by Lewis Anderson of the Scotsman and Glasgow World. Lewis, we had a chat on Friday, where we discussed this potentially happening, but I don't think any of us really expected it. But here it is, it's happened. His 7-year reign's over. How are you feeling?
I kind of feel the time was maybe right for Steve Clarke to move on. He looked a bit like a broken man, didn't he, after the Brazil game? And by all accounts, it didn't seem as though he handled any of his kind of post-match media duties very well either. So, yeah, obviously the nature of the announcement was, the timing of it was perhaps a bit of a shock, given, he just signed that new 4-year deal prior to the tournament getting underway. But clearly he kind of feels the time is he's taken this team as far as he can. It almost feels like the Scotland squad has kind of reached the end of its cycle. We touched on it heading into the World Cup. It was very much a kind of last hurrah, if you like, for 4 or 5 members of this squad, potentially a few others who will still be holding out hope of featuring at the home European Championships. But slightly disappointed. I think his contribution to the national team, he'll go down as Scotland's most successful manager of all time, of course, but it probably won't be for a fair few years to come until you kind of reflect and really appreciate what he's done during his time in charge.
Mark, obviously the main headline is Steve Clarke's reign is done, but before we get on to that, because we haven't had the discussion officially on this podcast, Scotland's World Cup exit was confirmed, though we kind of knew it was coming over the weekend, and that's why the Steve Clarke news came. Now that you've had a few hours to digest Scotland's 3 games and how it all unfolded and how it ended, how do you feel about Scotland's World Cup campaign? Because it feels, I don't know, to me it feels really underwhelming. We built up for so long and it felt like it was gone in a flash.
Scotland have done what I expected them to do, so I don't feel underwhelmed by it. I feel like we parred the course. We beat Haiti, the team who were ranked beneath us, as we should, and we lost to Morocco and we lost to Brazil. They are 2 teams that sit not just in the top 10 of world football, but at the time of play in the top 8. Scotland have, in the football food chain, no divine right to beat those 2 teams. So I don't think we can sit here and be particularly upset about the results. I think the performances have maybe underwhelmed some people. I do get that. But I think pragmatically, you have to accept where Scotland are as a football nation. We've spoken about it before. We have a smattering of elite players who play in roughly the same position. And then after that, we have some parts of the squad that just aren't ready yet to play international football. And that's ultimately why Scotland have finished third. What I think detractors of Steve Clarke are calling out is that the fact that we've had 3 tournaments under his watch and we've not progressed through either of them. And I suppose in terms of results, that's very fair. The World Cup is an extension of that. But I think Scotland have finished where I thought they would finish. Had Scotland beat Haiti by 4 goals, they still would not have qualified. So ultimately, as painful as it is for Scotland, I don't think there can be too many complaints about where Scotland finished. We got a tough group. We beat the team we were supposed to beat. And ultimately, it didn't happen for us. It's disappointing. You're right, the World Cup has ended pretty quickly for Scotland, but that's tournament football.
Looking at his resignation, Mark, I think some people thought it was a surprise that's maybe come from the fact that he signed that 4-year contract beforehand, which I think on its own was a bit of a surprise, the length of it. But I think for me personally, the writing was on the wall a little bit with his demeanour after the games. It struck me as he felt a little bit fed up. I think it was out of character for him to be as dismissive as he was, in my opinion. But he also seemed to struggle to really pick his best 11. The decision to not play Shankland in the second game, but introduce him straight into the fold, starting lineup in the Brazil game. There was just a few things that made me think, actually, this is not much of a surprise. I know we've had a few days to digest it now, but what was your initial reaction? Were you surprised, or were you kind of expecting it?
I don't think I was too surprised that he's resigned. Maybe the exact timing of it was a bit of a surprise. I think a lot of people have made a lot about the 4-year contract. Contracts can be broken very easily in football these days. I think what it probably did was protect the SFA should Scotland have a fantastic World Cup. Clarke said that he felt that if Scotland weren't going to get past the group stage, his time was up. So he probably had an inkling that if this panned out, he was going to go. So no, I don't think it should be a surprise. I think Clarke said it just feels right. I think it does feel right because the public is now largely against him, and he feels that his time is up. So it's a parting of the ways that does make total sense. So it shouldn't be a surprise. I think what maybe does surprise me a little bit is that some people are questioning some of his team selections. I think you just spoke about it there, Graham, about how certain things surprised. I don't think how Scotland lined up was a massive surprise. Scotland are a pragmatic football team under Clarke. Let's see if the next manager comes in and makes us less pragmatic, and we'll see what the results are afterwards. And I think the other thing to point out, a lot of people saying we won't fully appreciate Steve Clarke for years. I can't agree with that. Let's appreciate Steve Clarke right now. The man's done an incredible job. He's taken Scotland from also-rans to serial tournament qualifiers. That should be celebrated so much. I think he's done a great job for Scotland. I do agree it maybe is the right time for him to go, but we can celebrate his work right now. He should leave Hampden incredibly proud with what he's achieved as Scotland manager.
Lewis, I read on the internet yesterday that someone said it feels very Derek McInnes leaving Aberdeen, which I think is actually a really fair point. And Mark touched on there and how he might be remembered now and how he may be remembered in the future. I think it's quite raw with a fan base, and football is a really emotional game, sort of with ourselves, let alone with a fan base and supporters who've just spent thousands and thousands of pounds to get to America. In time, how do you see him being remembered by Scotland fans? And do you think, as Mark said before, we should remember him better now as opposed to in the future?
Well, certainly from my generation, we should be looking at Steve Clarke as the greatest ever, because we had the likes of Jock Stein and Sir Alex Ferguson and all that in years gone by, and you hear stories of what they achieved, and it was obviously terrific. But in my era, there has been no one that's rival come close to what Steve Clarke has achieved. Mark's probably right in terms of we should really look at celebrating what he's achieved now, because let's face it, we've actually been spoiled in the last couple of years getting back to major tournaments, and there's kind of that been a real there's a feel good factor around the nation now. We kind of expect almost to be qualifying for these major tournaments, which is a great position to be in. He vacates this role now, given where Scotland were, 7-8 years ago when he replaced Alex McLeish back in 2019. He described it in his open letter as a poison chalice. He was told not to take the job, but look at it now; it's a far more attractive proposition for his successor to step into. So, in my opinion, he has to rank up right at the very top. You can caveat that by saying, there hasn't been an easier opportunity to qualify for a major tournament, with the expanded 48-team tournament. But you still got to do the hard work to get there. And as Mark noted, when that group was drawn back in December time, Scotland were on for a third place finish. That was the ultimate goal. Unfortunately, we did finish third, but it hasn't been enough, and they end up. And whilst there's a feeling of complete deflation at this moment in time, I think once the dust settles, we'll look back on Steve Clarke's tenure quite fondly. I think the big factor as well is the style of football Steve Clarke played. It's not been overly attractive on the eye. He's made us really hard to beat. But you've got to work with what you've got at your disposal, and we've known for a very long time now that Scotland struggled to produce top class strikers that are going to score you goals regularly on the international scene. So he's done terrifically well with the squad. He's kind of maintained continuity over his 7 years in charge. There's been very few changes if you look at the squad year on year, and he kind of signs off. We're at a stage where, as I touched on earlier, 4 or 5 you'd imagine will be retiring from international football soon. But we've also got some exciting young players coming through: the Finlay Curtises, the Tyler Fletchers, the Lennon Millers, to build on. So he leaves us in a good place, and for that we can only thank him.
Talking of that next manager, which we will go on to, Mark, in terms of what we think should be the case or what kind of form they should be in, I think the big thing you're getting from Scotland fans, whether they were massively pro Steve Clarke or very anti Steve Clarke, is I think people want to see a freshness. Finlay Curtis was mentioned there. Tyler Fletcher went to the World Cup. I'm still really surprised Lennon Miller didn't, but I think he has got a future naturally and obviously for Scotland moving forward. How important is it that whoever takes the role as next Scotland manager starts by injecting those players in maybe the starting 11 or getting them more international caps and giving the team a bit of a freshness? Because, as Lewis says, we'll probably see 1 or 2 of them maybe end their international career in the coming months. I wouldn't be surprised by that. How important is it that the freshness comes into the squad when we return for the Nations League?
I think it's going to happen organically. I don't think it'll be forced upon the new head coach, because, as you say, some players may decide to call time on their international careers. I think there'll be a group of players that think they can have a shot at the Euros. That's for sure. I mean, you look at players that might be at the end of their Scotland careers, the ones that spring to mind are probably the 2 34-year-olds, Grant Hanley and Kenny McLean. I never like writing Craig Gordon off, but I mean, surely Craig Gordon can't go another 2 years. So you think they're probably going to be the ones that step away. But I think people like John McGinn and Andy Robertson, who are around the 30 mark, I think they're going to be on the premises for another potentially 4 years. And I think as long as their form keeps up, they should be. I find this debate about Lennon Miller and Tyler Fletcher quite interesting. Finlay Curtis as well. I mean, I personally don't think they're ready to start for Scotland. I don't think they're any better than what we have right now. I think the one thing that might change for them is that if the new head coach has a different style of playing football, which I suspect she almost certainly will, then Scotland may look to deploy their midfielders slightly differently. So it'll happen just naturally. It's funny, we're talking about these guys that are coming through. We're still not talking about the positions that I think are really critical for Scotland, and that's striker and defender. We're still talking about midfielders coming through, and okay, we haven't got great wide players. We've got Ben Gannon-Doak, who is still 20, I think. Ben Gannon-Doak, we forget how young he is. The thing that worries me the most is that this new head coach is coming in, and there's still the same glaring problems. We don't have goalkeepers coming through. We have limited defenders, and we have limited strikers. A head coach can't just rustle them out the sky. And that will be fascinating to see, that when the next person comes in, what they do to play the pretty average set of cards that Steve Clarke has been playing with, because he's still going to have those same cards.
I suppose there's work to be done to appoint a new boss. Before I ask you for names, Mark, which I will do, I'm giving you a little bit of prep there, both of you, but does the new boss have to be Scottish? Because that is a debate that's already been had on ITV, and I know Duncan Ferguson very, very strongly said they have to be Scottish. There was a debate over in England not too long ago when Tuchel got the job. I think it's a debate that will always rage on, but Scotland have had Bertie Vogts in the past. Does this new manager need to be Scottish, or can we be open to people outside of Scotland?
I think Lewis and I will have exactly the same answer. No, doesn't have to be Scottish. Lewis, do you agree with me?
Yes, absolutely, Mark. Yeah. I wrote a piece for the Scotsman yesterday evening as to why I believe Ange Postecoglou would be a prime Scotland managerial candidate going forward. I guess, the issue is it's going to be very difficult to lure Ange Postecoglou, given, there was a hefty compensation fee that Spurs had to pay out when he vacated the Tottenham job. Look, he's always kind of made it clear that he likes taking on a project, particularly at club level. From an international standpoint, he's got great managerial experience. He spent 4 years in charge of Australia, did incredibly well there, had them at 2 World Cup finals, various accolades along the way. He's obviously done terrifically well at club football, coming over to Europe with Celtic, given all he achieved out in Asia. Obviously, everyone knows how well he did with Celtic, but he's also got a brilliant track record of developing young players. He doesn't just throw them in for the sake of throwing them in. He gives them time to kind of find their feet, showcase their qualities, and kind of give them a platform to really develop from. Obviously, his style of football at Celtic, everyone knows that brand of kind of high intensity attacking football was outstanding. It was brilliant. I don't think anyone in previous years had kind of really seen anything quite like it. So look, it would be really intriguing to see Ange Postecoglou in the Scotland job. His family spoke very fondly about their time in Glasgow as well, how much they loved it up here. He's had a challenging couple of years down in the English Premier League. He might feel as though he's still got unfinished business there. But it would just be fascinating. It really would, because it'd be interesting to see him work with this type of group of players. Very kind of forward-thinking coach. And I think he'd be a great fit, in all honesty.
Yeah, I largely agree, to be honest. There's no real pushback on me from that. I think you've explained that very well. But Mark, there is other people within the bookies' favourites, which I think is all you can go on at the moment. It's far too raw, and the squad's barely even touched back down in Scotland, if they have even touched back down in Scotland. I think David Moyes is the current favourite, but if you were to make a decision today and have to pick one name, which I will kind of nail you down to do, would you be going with Postecoglou, or would you want to go elsewhere?
Out of all the names that have been mentioned so far, yeah, Postecoglou is the one that instantly catches the eye. I have no idea whether Ange Postecoglou would want it. I think that the argument for him is quite compelling, but there's lots of things you'd have to go through, not least wages. I just want Scotland to open this up. We talk a lot about. We look at the Scotland rugby team, for example. The head coach there has been there for longer than Steve Clarke, and it's often people say, "Well, why don't we open it up and see who we can attract?" That should be exactly the same for the football team as well. Now, let's see. There'll be coaches across the world who will look at Scotland and go, "That's a desirable job. I quite fancy having a crack of that." It's a nation that's been upwardly mobile and qualified for the last 3 tournaments. Plus, they've got a Euros on home soil. So I think that will be attractive to a number of coaches. I think the other thing is, it's not so much for me the name at the moment. It's about what type of football they're going to play, how they're going to set Scotland up. While I don't necessarily agree that Scotland should be this gung-ho, attack-minded team, because actually I don't. I think Scotland play the way they play because it's the best way of getting results for them. But if the public are crying out now for a national team that does things differently, then the SFA probably have to think about, right, let's go with someone that's going to be very different to Steve Clarke. There'll be lots of coaches out there who can do it, a lot of names that we don't even know about yet, but I suspect that's the way that they'll have to go now. Going to a Steve Clarke version 2, that's not going to go down very well, even if, it might not be the worst thing in the world if you want to see Scotland still at tournaments. It's going to be a fascinating dynamic on that one.
Yeah, really interesting few months ahead, and the league season hasn't even started yet, and of course that's to come back. But as I said at the start of the show, that's our final World Cup show. Scotland are out of it, so from our perspective, a lot of the main headlines are sort of touched on and gone and done. But massive thanks to everyone for joining us throughout sort of every day on the on the podcast. We thoroughly enjoyed it. Hopefully it's not the last World Cup one we do, or at least not the last one we do for 28 years, and hopefully we'll be back soon. But Lewis, Mark, listeners, commenters, whatever it may be, thanks for listening, and hopefully see you soon.